Hello and welcome to the Auteur Limits, where we'll be talking about the films of Sam Fuller in order to gain a fuller understanding. I am your host, as ever, Craig Ennis, and with me is the lovely Robert Beams. Hello, Robert Beams.
Hello, Craig Ennis. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm really good. Yeah, it's been a lovely weekend.
Excellent. I'm very happy because I don't want to put the cart before the horse and play my hand too early, but this was a very good Sam Fuller film that we're
It
talking about
was, wasn't
today.
it?
And I've had kind of diminishing returns on a few of them. There's been quite a few of the last ones where I've said, "Oh, there's a really good opening, and I really like the premise, and I really like this bit," but it's ultimately a bit limp. Whereas this one's like an 80-minute banger.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was completely suckered into this one. It's incredibly engrossing to the point where, given the fact it's Barbara Stanwyck in the lead, I was quite surprised that this one doesn't come up in more conversations about
Yeah, me too.
westerns.
I don't pretend to, I've watched a lot of the key westerns now because, as you know, over the last year, I've been going through like the They Shoot Pictures top 1,000 films of all time and stuff. So lots of the kind of great westerns that I've never seen because I've never really been into westerns. I've seen a lot of John Ford and Howard Hawks and all these kind of great westerns, and. But I can't pretend I'm like a student of the Western game to the point where I can say this with any authority. But it seemed to me that this could be quite influential on Sergio Leone because you get those like close-ups of like eyes during when
Mm.
people are walking together for like jewels and things like that, which I don't remember seeing in any of those other westerns of this era. And it's possible. I mean, Samuel Fuller was more influential, I think, in Europe than in the US. Obviously, the French New Wave people absolutely loved him. So maybe it stands to reason that Leone in Italy was really taken with Samuel Fuller. I have no idea. I'm sure somebody who's a real student of westerns in particular will be like, no, no, no. The first time that was done, but it's the first one the earliest I've seen that.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
mean we're talking about 1957, and
57. Yeah,
there's some strange bits of what seem like invention, or at least early examples of a few different things in this. I mean, you usually go through the plot
yeah. I
at least.
can
Why don't you
I
give
can
give
burn
all the
through it.
context?
So this one basically, and it's not that plot based. I mean, it's 80 minutes, so it's kind of in and out with its plot. But the plot is basically Barbara Stanwyck is the head of like 40 guns. These I guess this kind of rogue cowboy element that she controls that kind of causes a bit of trouble in the local town. Passing through is Griff and his two brothers. Griff played by a guy called Barry Sullivan, who I hadn't really heard of before. And I don't know who the other two are, but it's not important. There is two brothers. He's got a middle brother who's his kind of right hand man, who's his second gun or his first
That's
gun,
Gene Barry, yeah.
Gene Barry, and then you've got I think he's called Chico,
Chico,
who's his,
yeah.
they always
So
call him
Gene Barry
Chico,
is
his
Wes,
young
and
brother.
Chico. I'm just
Yeah.
going to say this because it'll make me chuckle like I'm a teenager. But Chico Bonnell is played by Robert Dix.
So yeah, you get Chico's basically he wants to join them as well as a gunman, but they're trying to get him to go off to uni or something, aren't they? They're trying to get him out. So they're like, go on, just move to London. No, he's like they're trying to get him to become a rancher, I think. And so because it's got that kind of Western trope of times are changing, isn't it? Where they're like, look, our days are numbered as gunmen. This isn't going to be like this much longer. Go get a real career, learn a trade. So they're trying to get Chico out of there, but they're passing through this town, and the local sheriff begs for their help, and he's turned down. Like Griff refuses the call, but then when the sheriff actually gets shot by the hoodlums, Griff just has to step in. So he gets involved, and when he gets involved, basically he then spends the rest of the film as the new marshal trying to restore order and bring down Stanwyck's gang of guns. Oddly, she's completely complicit in this with him most of the way. Uh, and and it leads to it leads to there's a love story which I would argue is, as always the case for Fuller, is probably the weakest element, but we can talk about that. And there's not a lot more happens plot wise. I mean, I could go through the beats of literally like there's this guy they capture and they take him to jail, and there's this guy they capture and they take him to jail. But it's basically goes along this thing. If he's got these certain people he's arresting, he takes them off the map one by one. His right hand man, his middleest brother, is going to get married, and then he gets shot by the last of the gunmen, which is telegraphed like really all the way through the film. It's like, when is that guy going to die? Because he keeps saying he has a line. It's not exactly this, but he has a line very similar to "This is my last job before retirement" at one point. And there's a scene where they're heading into a dangerous situation, and he's talking all about how he's getting married. And I'm kind of like, oh my god, this guy's so dead. And actually, he dies later in the film than I thought he would. I was thought, oh no, he's gotten away with it, but they get him in the end, the middleest guy. And then it ends with a final confrontation where this guy called I can't remember his name. Is it like Brookie or Brocky? Yeah. Brocky is Barbara Stanwyck's little brother, and he's like the biggest asshole of her gang. And he's like the main antagonist of the film, I suppose. And Griff kind of cold clocks him at the beginning of the film and knocks him out. But at the end of the film, he's due to be hung because he shot the middle brother. And what Brocky does is he busts out of jail. It's the most lax oversight of a guy who's on death row for a violent crime I've ever seen. Because basically, like the guy in the jailhouse, like has his back turned on him and everything, and just letting him do whatever when he's outside the cell. So he grabs Barbara Stanwyck and he grabs the lawman's gun. And he goes into the streets and basically says to Griff, "Look, you're not gonna shoot me because I've got my sister." And Griff does like a kind of baller Indiana Jones Han Solo type move where he just shoots Barbara Stanwyck and then shoots her little brother, which I'm not gonna lie is cool, even though it's probably problematic. But it is cool, and he has.
The original ending apparently was that because in the film he shoots her in the leg as kind of like in the original ending, Sam Fuller wanted to kill them both.
I think that would have been,
and the studio decided against it.
I think that would have been even cooler. I like. Although if he'd killed her, I wouldn't have got the line I really like that I've written down, where he walks down the street past her body, and he just says really offhand, "Get a doctor, she'll live." Which is really good. But anyway, it has to end with he's like, "Oh, I'm going to move on," and they're like, "Oh, well, Barbara Stanwyck loves you," and he's like, "No, I killed her brother. She doesn't love me," and he goes off all lonesome. But then the film kind of lets itself down a bit by having to like run down the road after him and be like, Griff, and like get into his carriage and ride off, which is again probably relevant for me. But we can go back to the beginning and talk through our notes. So that's essentially what the film is.
I mean,
he gets the girl.
I like the ending.
He destroys the gang and gets the girl who ran the gang, who is now supplicant.
Yeah, I think we got different readings of this gang, to be honest. Like, to put it in sort of D&T terms, the gang to me is sort of like this chaotic, neutral kind of force that just kind of works to its own gain. It's not particularly bad. It's not particularly good.
There's like a bad. Rocky's more of like a bad seed, isn't he? In the game, kind of ruining it for everybody.
They do illegal stuff and they go and like shake people down. It reminds me a bit of I don't know if you've seen Sons of Anarchy.
No.
It's a
motorcycle gang
that's basically like a version of Hamlet. And the person at the head of it all really is like Hamlet's mum. She's the one pulling the strings, and she's got all of these kind of big tough men who thinking they're acting on their own, but actually she's kind of the Machiavellian brain behind it all. And that's kind of what the 40 Guns are to me. Like Barbara Stanwyck is at the top pulling the strings, and then the guys are these kind of big strong macho men who go out and do big strong macho things, but actually they're just being completely used to get for our own gain, basically. That was kind of my reading of it. Off the bat, I just want to say right from the start, this film looks gorgeous throughout. Like, is just beautiful. The opening scenes actually reminded me, not just because it was black and white, but it looked like some of the Kurosawa stuff to me, with the big wide shots and the kind of close-ups of horse running and all that sort of stuff. I thought this was just stunningly photographed, this film.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's probably the best looking Sam Fuller film. and there's only one cheapo optical zoom I noticed in the whole thing as well. It's like it looks really solid, this whole film, like, all the way through.
Yeah,
like really nice. Like I would say this is his like highest quality overall film, I think, consistently all the way through.
There's some beautiful one-ers through the set as well. So reading up about the production a little bit, like you'll probably be surprised to learn that this was another quick and dirty turnaround where they were doing mainly one take of everything. But there's these, but it's much more complicated. There's all these lovely crane shots sort of coming down and sweeping. There's this fantastic one-er that takes you through the entire town pretty much and shows you the people and where they all are. I know you're a big fan of sense of geography, Rob. And you got this kind of long street with you know that the bar's on this side and although we don't spend much time in the bar, if any, and the kind of the coffin makers over here and then over there. There's it just looks amazing. It's this kind of one street town, isn't it?
Yeah, it was apparently the longest tracking shot Fox had done at the time as well that the film was made. So it was he was doing things that other filmmakers at the time were. The fact that the factoid is longest at Fox obviously leads to believe there are longer ones elsewhere. But the fact that he's even doing the longest one at Fox means he's part of a small band of people doing long take tracking shots at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to need you to lead me a little bit here. I've done the research. But I have to admit, I stopped taking notes quite quickly because it just suckered me in.
Well, my first note is literally I've written strong open, but I've been burned before. Because you get the opening's really cool. It's like these people are riding on the road and suddenly they're like kind of terrified because the big band of 40 guns are driving through. And Barbara Stanwyck's on her horse and she looks really cool. And I thought she was going to be a lot more of a badass than she is in the film based on the beginning, because she doesn't really do a lot actively through the film other than that. But like she rides through with all her guns, and I thought this is really cool. Let's see if it lives up to this. And then soon after that, you get the title come up, and it says Samuel Fuller's 40 Guns, like name above the title style.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the opening credits, it makes a point of saying written, produced, and directed by Samuel Fuller, which I thought was pretty cool. I think there is I know that's something we take for granted today. That's basically the standard credit for most, like, you know, auteurs and such. But like, this is not the norm in 1957. It's not the norm at a studio like Fox for the director to be the writer, producer, director. So the fact that in his final film at Fox here, I think out of his last 8 films up to this point, I think all but 2 of them are Fox films. And in his final Fox film here, he's become very different to when he started, because obviously when he came in at Fox, he was new to kind of big studios, right? And Zanuck probably had a lot more control then. I think a lot of those films have a lot more of Zanuck's kind of direction to a lot of what was going on. By the time we get to this one, it feels like he's kind of outgrown being at a big studio and that he kind of needs to branch.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, he talks about that in his. When he talks about the ending, he talks about he does talk about the restrictions of working within the studio system and like not being able to tell the story that he wanted to tell with the ending he wanted to tell in the way that he wanted to tell it. And he says he still thinks his ending's better, but he's happy enough with the way the film ends. But that's his main gripe. He doesn't talk about lots of other things that he could and couldn't do with the film. He just it's the only thing he really mentions is the film. He writes about this film sort of very proudly and says that it's the best film he had done up to that point, which
justifiably so.
Yeah.
I think I'm a big Steel Helmet fan, but I think this is way better made than Steel Helmet.
Yeah,
I just like the kind of a lot of the aspects of Steel Helmet, the story and the beats and the conversations about race in America and stuff. But this is a better film than Steel Helmet, I would say. There's a couple of lines I really liked at the beginning. I could tell it said like written by Samuel Fuller, and I thought brilliant, because when he writes the dialogue, you get a lot of really bad dialogue, but a lot of really great dialogue as well. Like there's nothing in between. It's either like really simplistic dialogue or like really cool, like almost like zingers that people
if he was working today, it's the sort of stuff you'd expect Nicolas Cage to deliver, I think.
Yeah. But he has at the very beginning, Griff tells the man, I can't remember the context, so it kind of means nothing on its own, but I wrote it down because he said to a guy, praying never gave a man the shakes, which I liked. And he says to the guy soon after, I didn't come to town to spank a wet nose. And I hoped when I wrote that down that wet nose wasn't any kind of dated ethnic slur, but
I imagine it probably was.
I don't think it is, because Chico keeps being referred to as a wet nose. Chico's the third brother.
Oh, like
at
a
the
bit
end of the film,
kind
he says like, "Oh, I'm not a wet nose anymore, am I?" No, you're not a wet nose. So I'm guessing it just means someone who's like young and not a bit green.
Yeah.
Right. So hopefully not an offensive term for me to be repeating on this podcast. But
in fact, you took a punt on it anyway.
I took a punt. I didn't come to town to spank a wet nose was just a really great turn of phrase to me. I wrote down after this, and I obviously got it wrong. I messaged you at the time. I sort of written this down and about it was that Barbara Stanwyck is 100% getting punched by the hero, and you said, well, no, it's actually like an upgrade on that because she gets, I didn't know at the time she was going to get shot. But as soon as I saw there was this like powerful woman potentially in the film, I thought, there is no way that Barry Sullivan isn't walking into a scene at one point just smacking him in the face, because that usually is the Fuller way.
She gets to slap a few people about. Actually, she kind of gets to raise her fist a couple of times.
I would say I have lots of things that I kind of will criticize about this film, as much as I really enjoyed it. I sort of gave it a 4 on Letterboxd, in some ways against my better judgment, because I think there are things that are like really wrong with the film in terms of its depiction of Stanwyck's character, and he can't do romance and he can't do women at all, Samuel Fuller, right. I think. And there's one of my notes actually is, Fuller is to romance what Nolan is to comedy and romance.
To be honest, I agree with you. I think that's been a real problem throughout all of these, but I thought this one did a much better job than anything else. So like the romance between Wes and the
lady that works at the gun shop.
Yeah, I thought that was really kind of well handled, because it doesn't start as quite often with the other ones. They just suddenly fall in complete passionate love and they're all over the place. This one starts off really flirtatious and just continues light and flirtatious in sort of the next 2 or 3 kind of meetings before they actually kind of. There's like a spark to begin with, like the promise of something. He's the one who kind of he decides, I'm going to settle down straight away, but she's not all in from the get-go.
Yeah, that's the side characters though. That the main characters, and that I agree that one's quite nicely handled. But the stuff with Stanwyck and Sullivan follows a kind of troubling trend with Fuller's films, where he writes these women who have a certain amount of power, and then their journey in the film is to cede the power and settle down with a man at the end. This happens in Park Row, most notably. You get the woman who's the rival newspaper person, who eventually her arc is she's got to kind of learn her place, I guess. And you get this in the end. You get this in the end song of the film. The very final line of the film is a song saying, it's that song saying she's a high riding woman with a whip who does what she wants and tells men what to do. But the final line of the song and the film is, but in the end, she's a woman after all, because she goes off and abandons it all and goes to the man. There's a bit earlier in the film where
that's true. I agree, but I think it's. I think there's also a thing here that's playing on about like her wealth, her money is. She comes from poverty. She builds herself up through crime, basically, and kind of builds this life for herself that is completely nefarious, and all this wealth and affluence. So there's also a morality tale there about crime, I think. I'm not saying that. I think can walk and chew gum. They're both there. The problematic kind of putting a woman in her place kind of thing, but it's also a morality tale about ill-gotten gains, if that makes sense.
The second string of the kind of the problematic way that Fuller depicts these romances as well is, not only does the woman in a position of power really quickly decide that everything she's built is subordinate to this guy she's just fallen in love with, which happens with lightning speed in several of his films. But the other troubling thing is, it's normally also a man who treats them very badly and violently, right? So normally it's a man like is in Pick Up on South Street. The first thing Richard Riddermark does when he meets the woman is punch her in the face, and that happens in a couple of Fuller films. They get slapped or normally punched by the guy that they're eventually going to fall in love with. And then in this one, he literally shoots her. He doesn't then run over and go, "Oh, my darling, I shot you, but I didn't mean to kill you," or "Get a doctor." He walks past with the cool line of saying, "Get a doctor, she'll live," completely dismissing her, right?
Yeah.
And then she runs after him and goes, "Oh, I love you, Griff."
But that's I thought, yeah, but I found the ending much more ambiguous, because basically at that point he's blaming her for his brother's death, isn't he? Because she's failed to keep her little brother in control, and he's run around kind of doing what the hell he likes, and it's her little brother who's killed his brother on his wedding day, so that he's got this kind of vendetta against Brocky. He's also he's also a reformed sort of gunslinger who hasn't actually used any violence up to that point, and he doesn't want to use any violence, and is forced back into that violence and uses sort of deadly skills. So he's disgusted with himself as well that he has to go back into this.
Am I right in thinking he doesn't actually shoot anybody himself till the very end, right?
No, till the very end. Yeah, that's the whole point. He's done his killing, and he wants no more part in it. That's why he refuses the call to begin with to become the new sheriff, basically, and starts to go around his sheriffy kind of marshalling duties with kind of wit and planning rather than force. Like he's not going in guns blazing on anything. You know, it's his little brother Chico who's kind of the who's the gung-ho kind of wet nose, which is kind of surprising why it's not Chico who, you know, in a more conventional narrative, I think it would be Chico who got the bullet. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because he's
if
the
he was
young guy
more
they're
of a
trying
character.
to keep. Yeah, because he's the young guy they're trying to keep out of this life because it's a dangerous life. So absolutely, he would usually take a bullet. I think the reason it was clear to me Wes was going to take the bullet was because they were setting up a side character with a romance who was talking about how he was going to get married and settle down and leave this life just after we finish this. So you're just like, oh, okay. This guy's days are numbered.
The Murtaugh effect.
Yeah, and at one point I thought that had been circumvented, because there's a bit in the film where they send Chico off on a stagecoach, and then Wes and Griff go to arrest somebody called like Johnny Savage or something, something like that. Charlie Savage, right? So they're going off to get Charlie Savage, but they send Chico off in a stagecoach. And I thought, oh, okay, so this is where Wes dies, because Wes is walking down the road. That's when he basically says, "This is my last job before I settle down and get married." So I thought, right, so Wes gets shot here during this scene, and then Chico comes back because he hears his brother's been shot, and then he becomes the first gun. And actually, he kind of completely circumvented what I thought was going to happen, because he ends up getting saved by Chico, who's come back and takes out that gunman. And I thought, oh, maybe Wes is going to make it after all. But then Wes gets gunned down on his wedding day, which is even better. The thing I want to mention, just going kind of through my notes, is that there are quite a few things he does in this film. Not all of them work, I would say, but there are a few things Fuller does in this film stylistically that are kind of odd and experimental and interesting. So, like at the very beginning of the film, when the former marshal is being shot by the thugs, you get this kind of POV of him that shows that he's got very poor vision, where the camera goes all blurry and you can barely see Brocky as he's kind of looking up at Brocky because the camera's all blurry. So you get this POV shot. You also get a POV shot of Wes looking down the barrel of a gun, kind of like James Bond opening credits style, but down the end of the gun is the face of the woman in the gun shop who he wants to marry. And then there's another weird bit, which is the only optical zoom in the film, and that's why it kind of stood out to me as far as I could tell, where you get this shot of Barbara Stanwyck that then gets faded over a landscape, and as it's fading over a landscape, it's kind of zooming in on her face that gets really grainy, which again doesn't really work, but he's clearly trying to do something that's not the normal, just a cut, or not the normal way of shooting it. And it's interesting. Like, it feels like, especially considering how, and I can see why the French New Wave people were into him, because I think when you're talking about this being filmed over how many days was this one? Was this a couple of weeks as well? Like
yeah.
So when you're talking about someone who can bash out a really good Western like this in a couple of weeks, and while they're doing it with all these single, just
remember,
like
this is also the third film he makes this year.
Exactly right. So you can bash out this Western, but while he's doing it, he's also doing a long tracking shot. He's also doing these weird POV shots and things like that, and doing some interesting stuff. So it's a kind of there's a kind of a rough and ready dirtiness to Sam Fuller, but at the same time, there is also the feeling that he has got a certain amount of craft and kind of love of the art as well. I don't think it's as strong as the rough and dirty aspect, but I think it's there. And I think it gives it a kind of a flavour.
I wanted to just come back to what you were saying a little bit about giving up the woman giving up her life for the man. And I also want to talk about the speed of that relationship as well. But it's interesting, this quote, and I don't necessarily agree with it, but I thought I'd bring this up. I'd forgotten about it and that's why I didn't mention it at the time. But here we go. They showed 40 guns at the Locarno Film Festival in Switzerland a few years ago as part of a tribute. There were 2,000 spectators in the Piazza Grande. On the screen, you could see the tiny veins in the necks of those galloping horses. That's just how close Joe Birrick's camera was in that dolly shot. To see the film projected on size that screen was really exciting. For the festival goers, they subtitled the picture in French and Italian. Whatever language they spoke, everybody understood Jessica's passionate, forceful character. Several women came running up to me afterwards and said 40 Guns was the most feminist movie they'd ever seen.
Wow. Interesting. That's I mean,
I wonder if that's also, it's a reflection of the times as well to a certain degree. Because the scene that really gets me in terms of her power is the scene with the long table, where they're all having dinner and she's at the head of the table and she's dressed and her kind of 40 guys are down there, and Griff brings a writ, like a notice of a warrant for her right hand man, essentially, and then they all kind of pass it down to her one after the other.
That's a great shot. I love that shot, and I know I do this every episode, but that for me felt like another Spielberg shot. I know that because I know Spielberg was obviously a fan of his and influenced by him. I keep seeing these things in there. I think feel to me very, very Spielberg, and that I felt this is exactly how Steven Spielberg would film this moment. It just, I don't know, I can't really explain it beyond that. It was how visual it was. I think it's just how visual it is, because above all, Steven Spielberg cares about a visual over a kind of something that's efficient, I suppose, a lot of the time.
And it's also a really good scene for showing her power over all these, because obviously, apart from just sitting, everything is done through gestures and nods. So she kind of nods for it and it gets passed. And then there's the guy who's kind of who's had the warrant, and he's got all of the gang there, they're rolling deep, full force, and she just sacrifices him without a moment's kind of hesitation, doesn't she? She sort of says, "You better go." Well, she nods to him, and he kind of goes, "What?" And she has to sort of repeat it, but she's just kind of stone-faced about the whole thing, and then sends them all out so she can have this conversation, and a few of them sort of hang by, and she's like,
they're not just her gang either. I think at that dinner there's the governor. Yeah. So she dismisses the governor as well, which is kind of cool. But I would say though, and I have a feeling we probably don't necessarily agree on this, but I would say that it's downhill from there in terms of her character's power, because that is the only scene in the film really, apart from the opening where she's on the horse, where she is just unambiguously a badass. As soon as Griff walks into her life, she begins the just Sam Fuller woman descent into "I love Griff and I don't care about anything else now." And as there's a scene where he goes onto her land. I think the next time he meets her in the film, he goes onto her land to find someone who's hiding out there. And during that scene, she starts off still kind of a badass, but I think by the end of it, he's saving her from falling off a horse.
Well, and
it's just I was hoping she was going to be cooler than this.
This is why I don't mind. This is why I don't mind the speed of it, because it's if to go to Speed, the actual film, the ending where she talks about relationships based on intense situations don't tend to last. So during that scene, this tornado comes in, and there's this massive windstorm that goes
Which looks
on.
Great, by the way. That tornado looks amazing. Yeah.
There's a bit of a matte painting in the background.
It is. I love it.
But there's actually like tumbleweeds, and there's clear. It was cement. Apparently, it was like this really fine cement that they put in there that was just like complete murder on the actor's kind of skin and eyes. But it goes on for ages. So at one point, Barbara Stanwyck falls off her horse, and it was Barbara Stanwyck doing the stunt, and gets dragged along the floor like this close to the hooves of the hooves of the horse. And like horse falls and sort of drags were the most dangerous stunts you could do on a western. But she insisted on doing it herself quite early into the production, and they were really worried about her getting messed up because in that kind of executive way, not because she might get hurt, but because there was still 2 weeks of filming left afterwards. She did that 3 times.
Wow.
So they go through the storm. The storm goes on for so long, and they kind of manage to take shelter. That kind of I don't mind that sort of intense moment that brings them together, and they lie in the barn, and she tells him about her upbringing and her mother dying, and she tells him about like delivering Brocky and her mother dying in the process, and living in this shed, and why she's so attached to her shitty little brother. And that all kind of made sense to me, that they're hiding out here and they have this intense moment. And that's kind of where the seeds of it all starts. But I would agree, thanks to the short running time, that everything else gets sped up after that.
It does. I agree.
And actually, you can't say this about a lot of films, but maybe an extra 10, 15 minutes would actually help plug some of those gaps.
Probably, but I do love that this is sub 90. I think that's one of its charms. But I do agree with you. I want to say as well, because it probably sounds to some extent like I'm saying the current discourse does not apply comfortably to this film and that from 1957 and therefore bad, which is not my point of view on the film at all. But like what I do want to say is within the context of 1957, I'm sure Stanwyck was absolutely bit off his hand for this part, because while it doesn't go the direction and doesn't make her as tough as I wanted watching it, she is still this woman in power, riding horses, doing horse falls, in charge of this gang, doing all this stuff, which isn't the kind of role Barbara Stanwyck was playing in other films. I mean, she didn't play like weak characters, but this is a very different role for her. So I think she must have loved that.
And she has another, the other moment that she really has to sort of shine. I mean, she's got that, and I think the scene in the barn's really good. The scene on the table's great. The scene in the bar, but the scene they do talk about the gang mainly dispersing, and the 40 guns aren't really any. They're just a massive. There's a massive, just nameless. They're just a force.
Yeah.
I'm going to say actually there's 4 scenes. There's a sort of scene where she kind of dismisses like her consigliere and just goes, she's done with him. So she writes him a check, like as if that's like he seems to think there's more. He's kind of thinks that he's part of this and he's important. But she's like, no, I'll write you a check and off you go. And he ends up hanging himself because he realizes how disposable he is to her. And then the other scene, although the gang's largely disbanded, I thought the scene which she got to really kind of put something quite emotionally complex across was when she actually goes and tells her brother, I'm not going to save you this time. You're going to hang. Like, you've gone too far. Like, I'm not going to bail you out. And she's obviously conflicted about that as well. So the sort of psychodrama of it all really worked for me. Like, the kind of siblings and the cross purposes and all that kind of stuff, I thought was great.
I've got a moderately hot take about something in this film that I'm basing on almost nothing. It's pure speculation, and maybe you can illuminate the facts for me. But like, there's a bit where the guy hangs himself, right? That you mentioned her, like the guy that loves her, but she just sees as a disposable fella. He hangs himself. You get this kind of macabre shot of his body, his legs swinging as they look through a dimly lit doorway. and then it literally cuts to the next scene, which is like really jaunty music, and it's really tonally just absolutely fucked. Like it's so jarring and so wrong as a cut in the film. And I thought about it when it was going on, and this is where I'm maybe seeing things that aren't there. But I know you've talked on previous episodes about his experiences in the war and his experiences that inform a lot of the conversations in his war films as well, where there is that undulation between horrible tragedy, just seeing my friend's head blown off or whatever, but then we're playing the banjo and talking about women or doing something else. And the way that those experiences were, basically what I'm saying is what I know, the little I know about Samuel Fuller's war experiences, plus what I know from what you said about his attitude towards kind of just being very matter of fact and moving on and getting things done. I don't think Sam Fuller, the person, would stop and give a respectful pause to the bad thing that happened. Yeah. I think Sam Fuller's someone that goes, "Oh, that's really sad. That's really harsh," and then he moves on immediately to the next thing, because Sam Fuller's always moving, man. that's what I thought. So when that jarring cut happened, I thought that's perhaps objectively a kind of a bad tonal shift. But I thought, no, I think this is the Sam Fuller that's like walking through Germany, seeing bad shit happen, and then being bored, and then joking with mates, and then, you know what I mean? And I think that's informing something in his psyche.
I don't think it's. You're right.
It's conscious.
No, not at all. No, I think that's really astute. I think that's. I like that. I like that quite a lot. Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, it's something to look out for in his further films as well, I think, and maybe. Some of the like non-specifically war films as well. There's some stuff in the next film we're going to talk about, which is Verboten, that might reinforce that. There'll certainly be some of that stuff in The Naked Kiss later on as well. But yeah, quite possibly, that could, like you say, he's always moving. He doesn't stop for anyone or anything,
for sentiment, or for I'm not saying his films wouldn't ever contain sentiment or those kind of moments, but he doesn't pause and linger on anything too long, which can be his flaw, because like you say, maybe this film could use some breathing room, maybe the relationship could have been extended a bit to give it some more depth and make it a bit more developed. But at the same time, I think Fuller is very much, he kind of, in the same way he makes the films, which is get in, shoot the scene, move on, do the next scene. We're not going to do a second take. I think that seems to be something of a moral philosophy to life for Samuel Fuller. Like, I think his whole approach is very like, we know that now. Yeah, they're in love. Cool. You've got it? Good. We're going to move on to the next thing that's important. And I kind of admire it. Like, I kind of like it in a way.
Well, it's that beautiful thing of this one being 80 minutes long, and you're done.
Which I love.
Move on.
Yeah, you got it now. I mean, I've basically gone through my notes on this one. I liked it a lot. I really enjoyed it. I would like to see this film projected on a big screen, because I'm watching, a copy of it on an online like Daily Motion video or whatever, which isn't the ideal quality, and you do sort of see some things get sort of pixelated and stuff like that. So I would love to see every vein of the horses. I feel like this is a case of a film that at the moment seems to be relatively obscured, and it needs like Criterion or someone to like pick it up and restore it and give it a glorious release sort of treatment. I think
it's a hipster's favorite in waiting, isn't it?
It is. It's the one of old. But have you seen 40 Guns? That's the best time for the film.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just a few other things I really like, because there's some stuff that he talks about in his biography as well. But I really like the fact that the gunslingers aren't glamorized. They are by the people in the town to a certain degree, but not by Fuller and not by them themselves. It's a dirty business. There's people getting shot in the back. Griff is like a badass in the way that he walks, and that he hasn't got any particular fear, but he's not proud of what he does, or anything like that. He's kind of, it's all very, very reluctant. And I know that's a bit of a trope as well. But it's not an all guns blazing kind of film.
It's interesting because I was reading ahead. I was just checking if he ever made another film for Fox after this, and he didn't. He didn't ever do a film for Fox again in his career. But in the course of doing it, I ended up reading a little bit of the Wikipedia page about the film Shark, which I'm obviously really excited to watch at some point, as I mention all the time.
That's that's his third and final exclamation mark film, I think.
Yeah, of the exclamation mark trilogy. And there's a thing he says in here about the film Shark. Fuller later said, this according to Wikipedia, so who knows how true this is. Fuller later said, I like the idea of making a story where for once the hero is really the heavy is the girl, there's another heavy, and you find out in the end they're all heavies. I feel like the same could be applied to 40 Guns. Is that what you're just saying?
This is another thing. This was another thing that really surprised me reading through. He talks about sexual metaphors and guns, but given we know that he's a director who much like Sam Peckinpah, is quite fond of shooting guns at actors to get them to startle and whatnot. He talks about guns in here. He talks about one goddamn bullet has always been decisive from Sarajevo to Dallas. There's no more alibis with a bullet. Conventions, treaties, all good efforts and bullshit, phony. What really determines the beginning and end of every conflict since the invention of the gunpowder is the trajectory of one bullet. And then he goes on to say, guns in movies are fantasy objects. In real life, there are just too many guns and too many violent people who have access to them. The argument that our Constitution gives everybody the right to carry guns is stupid. It was written in 1789 when we were afraid that the British might return and would have to fight for our independence. The situation is crazy today, and something clear-cut must be done to keep the tools of violence away from destructive people, especially our youngsters. We must teach our children tolerance and forgiveness, and how not to resort to guns. If films like 40 Guns serve any greater purpose at all, then and who the hell can say if they do? It's to show how inhumane and fruitless violence is.
It's interesting because there's been a few times on his previous films where you've read a quote like that about them, where he's got some view about what it's really saying that just never came across in the film whatsoever. Like, I don't see this film as a cautionary tale about guns. Like, they feature so infrequently. In fact, there is a gun at one point in this film which is directly used as a kind of a loving gaze object. There's a gun they look down the barrel of at their lover to kind of take sights on the person they're going to marry. So it's kind of if that is what's going on, it's muddled in execution.
Yeah. Somewhat. Let me just check. There was something else. Yeah, there was one other thing. Yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't necessarily come across that way. Yeah, there was one other thing just that I picked out, which I found quite amusing. So Marilyn Monroe wanted to play the lead in this, and she met with Sam Fuller, and he said, "No, if you play the lead, it'll become a comedy. Like, you are too, you don't have the toughness. You know, you seem too innocent. It wouldn't come across." And maybe he's right. Maybe that'd be a completely different way to play it, a way that might be a little bit more insidious and a little bit kind of more malevolent, actually. But he says no, and she explains why, and she goes, "Fair enough." And he says that he's going to try and get her another part. And he says, "Monroe was a wonderful person. I'd always hold her in esteem because she was gracious enough to accept a blind date with my brother Ving in the early 50s. Then came out to the West Coast for a visit and asked me to fix him up for a night in the town. Marilyn happily agreed to my request. When Marilyn showed up, Ving's mouth dropped open." It goes on to say that he was a perfect gentleman, and it was a nice time had by all, but they didn't repeat it. But yeah, he just set his brother up on a blind date with Marilyn Monroe.
Wow, interesting.
And the one last thing I wanted to just talk about the ending was that I quite liked about the ending. I know she's running after him, going Griff, 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 but I liked it was quite ambiguous because he obviously is trying to leave without her. And right at the end, just as they're going over the hill, you see her manage to climb on. But you just don't know if it's going to work out because he's just killed her brother. You don't know if it's going to work out because his brother killed her brother. So it's this really nice kind of ambiguous ending where they go off and the story's continued. But
there are certain films where you can just feel that the ending's been tacked on by the studio.
Yeah,
I got that feeling watching this because it seemed like I didn't know that he intended to shoot it so that she'd been killed. I didn't realize that part, but the ending tone is so somber, with it kind of being like, well, this is my lot in life, to head off into the sunset as the stoic hero who's not going to get to have that happy ending, and then for her to literally come from stage right and just run after his carriage.
Well, like I say, it's not his ending, and I think
Yeah.
actually there is a better ending that sits between the two of them, where he still shoots her in the leg rather than killing her. But at the end, there's so much sort of water under the bridge and sort of bad feeling between the both of them that they can't reconcile that and actually be together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that was to me the ending that made the most sense. But and like I say, that song underpinning it that talks about how she's only a woman at the end of the day, I think for me, if that wasn't there, it would be a stronger film. Like, I just, especially because most of that song is about how she's cool. Like that song starts off like she's a riding woman with a whip, you know. That kind of thing. It's like, okay, cool, but then it's like, oh.
I think we talk about his intentions and whatnot.
Yeah,
but I think this is a case of the sting being cut out by the studio imposing their kind of their sort of normative ending, the sort of
their 50s view on what men and women are.
Exactly.
Put into the film. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I probably sounded more negative on parts of it than I was, but I did really, really like it.
It's such an easy watch.
It is.
And it's really entertaining throughout. And yeah, probably the best that we've seen so far.
Yeah, I would say so. Verboten's next, right?
Verboten, yeah, is the second in the Exclamation trilogy.
I might be wrong, but I think this kicks off a bit of a run he does at Columbia. I think there's a long kind of line of Columbia ones.
Yeah, it sounds about right. I mean, we didn't know what to expect from 40 Guns, but we're hitting a bit of a purple patch, because I know that you've seen Crimson Kimono and really liked it.
It's great.
I really like. I've seen Verboten before, and I was a real fan of it. It's set in post-war Germany, and like recent post-war Germany, and it's about a kind of continued German resistance, if you like, against the last embers of kind of people who aren't really, people who aren't quite ready to give, not necessarily even Nazis, but people who aren't ready to give up the fight for Germany, and this kind of underground militia movement. And it's about a GI, or even an ex-GI, possibly. He might have just come out of I can't remember exactly, but he kind of decides to set up shop in Germany and meets a German woman, and it kind of unspools from there, really. And I found this one really interesting.
That sounds really interesting. That sounds a great setup. I think Fuller's setups in general, like the kind of the elevator pitch for most of his movies, is really good. So I think I've learned by now that I need to wait sort of 20 minutes into the movie to see if it's kind of living up to it, because I'm sure the opening's an absolute banger. I need to see whether it's going there. But I'm really looking forward to it. That sounds like a great premise.
Yeah, no, I like this one a lot, so I'm looking forward to see what you think about it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very much. Have you got any more to add?
No, just that I think we're halfway there now. So I counted this was the 11th, and there was sort of 13 or so left. I've got some bad news for you, Rob.
Oh, no.
Dead Pigeon on Beethoven Street looks like it's a TV movie rather than a movie. So, and it's quite difficult to get hold of
it. We can't get hold of it.
I don't know, but it's possible that Dead Pigeon on Beethoven Street will drop out of the back end of the podcast.
Oh no, we'll have to. We'll do our best.
Which is like 70% of the reason why you wanted to do it. But yeah, so we're about halfway there now, and like I say, get a patch hopefully.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to it. I have a feeling, because I was looking over his films this morning, like I say, to see which studios distributed them and stuff. And I have a feeling his last few are going to be really hard to find, because their Wikipedia pages are like a sentence and no images. You know, they're like real like obscure films.
We're going to be right up to A White Dog, and I found a copy of Streets of No Return, but Thieves After a Dark and Madonna and the Dragon I haven't even looked for yet. But we're going to be all right up until the white dog for definite.
Yeah, well, that's good. Let's hope we can find all of them. Let's.
Well,
hope.
I'll set you the challenge of finding dead pigeon on Beethoven Street.
Well, eagerly accepted. Well, thank you very much for watching / listening to our latest entry in this guide to obtaining fuller understanding. And we'll see you next time with Verboten. Thank you.